Morning, everybody. Welcome to the December board meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Farrar, roll call, please.
Chairman. Mark Finkel.
Here.
Thomas Stover.
Here.
Albert Hayes.
Here.
David Bergquist.
Here.
Anthony Netto.
Here.
Jeffrey Rosenthal.
Here.
Michael Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Fulton.
Here.
John Hudson.
Here.
Richard Farrar. Here. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And it would be appropriate, since you just did the roll call, to note that this is the last meeting for one of our members, and Tom Stover has fulfilled his term, and I wanted, on behalf of the board, I just wanted to thank him for his service. Thank you. What a pleasure it's been to work with him.
I'll make a motion to that effect for the record.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? I want to see the no votes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We need to adopt a revised meeting agenda. When we did this up, we left no place for public comment. So between 5 and 6, we'll have a public comment period. And we have the need, and we want to get everybody out of here early today because of the snow pending, but a need for a very quick executive session at the end of the meeting.
To discuss mitigation, Borlex, and NICID,
to
and
discuss.
collective bargaining issues?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I need a motion to that effect to adopt the revised meeting agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Hayes.
Second.
Mr. Stover.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have, well, this goes under the public comments, but no guests, but we do have some people who want to speak in the public comment period. Steve, Steve, yep.
Yell. It's Frank for screaming holler. That's what my kids will say. Good morning, gentlemen. Steve Yell from Clayton. I just purchased a property here in the city of Watertown.
Mr. Yell, could you just stand here so we pick you up on the...
Yes.
Toward-
Just purchased a property in the city of Watertown recently. Used to be the old Taggart Mill down on Main Street. The mill burned down in 1973, and the dam has been destroyed for a while. And so I'm asking two things. One is, can I get a copy of the original formula for the assessment of that tax? And number two, can I have that reassessed for that particular property?
This,
Well, what,
yeah, Mike, this is.
well, I can jump in on this too, that what the gentleman's referring to is a mill that is currently on the assessment sheet and part of the apportionment for the Black River. If you'll remember, we have had a couple of other folks in similar situations recently that have mills or properties that are assessed for head on the Black River and yet do not have an operating, don't have an operating business on them at this point. And the discussion we had back, and it was actually in September with the one gentleman, if you recall, the discussion was that, right, we are aware of the situation. There are a few properties that have similar circumstances, and as we've discussed before, ultimately what we're talking about is a reapportionment of costs within the Black River in order to accomplish what this gentleman and well, actually this gentleman, yes. Don Alexander was the other gentleman I was just speaking of, and I didn't realize he was going to be here. But ultimately, I believe what we would need to do to accomplish that would be to reapportion the Black River beneficiaries and acknowledge the fact that although they've got head, that there's no viable business on that site at this point. I mean, that's where we're at right now. Now, can the board take some interim step? I don't think so.
We assess for potential, right?
Available head.
Available head, okay. And is his assessment based on past usage or just on potential?
Just
It's
Just
based on head.
Based on head? Is that they're all
They're all
based on, okay.
based on head, based on the amount of drop in the river. Rob's much better able to handle a definition of exactly what head is.
Head is the height of water that provides potential energy to do work
Right.
of any type.
It's just a proportion of the site's, that's the site's head relative to the total amount of head downstream of each of the reservoirs that serve that particular site. So there, in the case of the Black River area, it's several formulas. One for the Moose River, which contains the Old Forge, Six Lake, and combination of reservoirs. So there's one set of total head of all of the facilities downstream relative to those projects, and each project proportions based on its head relative to that total amount for that particular serviced area, and then a similar calculation for still water based on all of the hydros downstream of still water. So in the case of facilities that are downstream of the confluence of the Beaver and the Black, and which also include the tributary from the Moose, some projects downstream, basically Carthage on down, those projects have two equations upon which their total assessment is based. So that's it in a nutshell, but there is a fairly sizable spreadsheet that's used to do the calculation for assessment, and that assessment is based on.
He had, part of your request was for the original
Formula. Yeah, or
formula.
assessment regulations.
Is that something we can get to him?
Yeah, we certainly
Yes,
have those
we can
records.
provide that,
At
yes.
least, and then we
Yeah.
can talk about this issue further.
Gentlemen.
Just shoot me an email. I'm Rick Farrar, the CFO, so shoot me an email and request that.
Okay, thank you.
We have Carol, and I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name.
See, that's shock, not French, that's German, and it doesn't mean stubborn, okay?
Okay.
Nobody says that.
Carol,
Hi, okay,
I think we need you up here for
Okay.
for the camera and the.
next on the floor.
Good, that's good. Just try to get near one of the lights.
I'll fast forward and tell you why I'm here, and then I'll back up a little into you, okay? I'm here about the water levels in the Stillwater Reservoir, okay? And I have had conversations with you before, and I don't want to throw you under the bus. He's the one that suggested some point in time we come before the board, and I think that went
So-
2 years ago, so. Okay. I'm talking about the Stillwater Reservoir water levels, and as all of you know, I believe I understand the purpose and the mission of your organization. I think I get that. And I understand how, the flood control, I understand the power part. And I'm not trying to propose anything that would upset what you need to accomplish. But what I am asking is for this board's consideration that the water levels in the Stillwater Reservoir, we have many things going on up there, and the water levels are dropping, it seems, sooner and sooner. Now, I would hate to stand here before you and tell you I've been there forever. I don't live there, but I've had property in my family, grandfather, so forth, that's had property in Beaver River Station, which is on the far end of the Stillwater Reservoir. That community, as you all know, has no road access. So in particular, the whole region benefits from water in that reservoir back when you guys actually decided to let it be recreational. Remember when you made that mistake? But the community of Beaver River were so dependent on that body of water. And it used to be exclusively, the access was for boat access for people to use their properties. Now, of course, there is a barge in place by a private business, but even the operation of that barge is in question. It needs water, but also there's some litigation issues with that as well. So, having said that, I'm here to ask the board if they could just postpone the immediate drawdown of that body of water. It appears to me as though it's starting the real drawdown is starting the first part of August. If that could be pushed back 3 weeks, 4 would be perfect, but a 3-week pushback of letting that just run out a little bit, that would probably significantly help our situation. I'll give you some reasons why this is so important, other than the people having access to their properties. As we all know, in upstate New York, we have a very short season. So most of these people that pay a lot of money for their taxes for these properties are not having much of a summer use because of the difficulties of getting there. Okay, that's one. A second thing that is notable, the wells, most of the wells in the community that the people get their water from is relevant to the water level of the reservoir. Again, not a big deal, but a lot of people are running out of water towards the end of the year. There is the safety issue, a lot of camping and sportsmen and so forth on the reservoir. The lower the water, the more accidents, the more tragedies we have. I always say, you know, the good thing about this area of the Adirondacks is the black flies and I call them speed bumps in the reservoir, the shoals and the rocks, keeps the population down. But in reality, that also causes a lot of problems. So, I don't know, is there a reason? I mean, because I'm looking at your charts, and I've had a conversation with him before, and whatever he does very well, because when he talked to me after about 5 minutes of that lingo, I was just like I said to my husband, you talk to him. But if I look at the charts, it appears that if it was pushed off, the need to have the 100-year storm or whatever, there's still enough space in there, all right, enough room to accommodate that and still leave the water levels a little high. Another point is, a few years back, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I happened to be president of the Beaver River Property Owners Association. And at that time, as I was leaving, the DEC and the state came to us, and we have docks on the reservoir. And the problem is you can't have docks on state land without permits, without insurance, yada, yada, yada. It was a mess. So what the property owners decided to do was to make it compliant. To do so, do you people know what I'm talking about when I talk about where the docks are? You're all kind of okay. That'll make this a little shorter. So anyways, privately, we have 125 private dwellings in Beaver River and 3 businesses. Privately, they raised about $30,000 to $35,000 to make those docks compliant, so that the community, the people, the sport, anybody in the area can use it. When they had the dedication the following year on July 18th, there was no water at the docks. July 18th. So these people are paying money to pay for docks to use that they, you know, we're just thinking if we could get it to Labor Day, I think everybody would be happy. And the last comment I want to make is, I have noticed that there are times when there is a special event somewhere, Fulton Chain somewhere, and you folks are very accommodating to make sure there's water there for, I probably have the wrong words, but paddle fest, whatever it is, okay? And I got thinking, if you can do something to accommodate a 1 or 2 day event to bring in tourism and, you know, boost the economy and so forth, it only seems to me that there should be equal consideration for people that are paying the tax base and, you know, have that property up there. So that's my story. If you got any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. And I don't know what your process is to, if it's just a flat no, or what it would take to try to achieve this.
Well, we need some expert
Well,
engineering.
I would direct the board to my page 8, which would be, sorry?
75.
Thank you, which is this 2014 curve for this year. I think it kind of speaks for itself with regard to where the reservoir was relative to the dotted line, which represents kind of the target, the operating curve.
Who sets that, can I ask you a question? Who sets that target?
That's set by the district.
Okay.
And you know, it's based on preparation and need and refilling and
Okay.
and the smooth, continuous thin line, which represents the historic average. From the beginning of June until the beginning of August, we were above the historic average, including the July period reference. We only just dropped below the historic average by about a foot in October. And this summer was fairly dry, if you recall. We were making minimum releases. The middle of August, we were right on target, right on historic average. And as we normally do, we get fall rain. And you'll see the little bump from the end of October to the end of November. Reservoir came up and dropped down. Now that historic average for the fall is not something you want to follow, because that puts you in a position of being unable to store additional water. You still need to prepare the reservoir. So this time of the year, you know, the preference certainly is to be below what is historic. That, and quite frankly, the operation of the reservoir with the historic elevations and the operation over the years is more a result of not responding quickly enough to the flow in order to keep the reservoir prepared for inflow. And certainly this time of the year, and we have seen it, we can get sufficient enough rain to almost completely refill the reservoir this time of the year. So that's something you have to be prepared for, which requires us to stay as close as we can to somewhere between the operation elevation and basically where it is right now at the end of November, but certainly not significantly higher. You know, you don't track. If you kept tracking the historic average would creep up and creep up and creep up, and pretty, you know, you'd create a new historic average that's higher every time you tried to follow the historic average, because you'd be receiving more flow, and it would go up higher, and the next year the average would be slightly higher. So it isn't something that you follow, but as I said, I think it speaks for itself in terms of where we were in terms of elevation.
Well, I know my experience, of course, is Sacandaga, which had the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to echo those
Yeah.
remarks.
And we did look at some compromise where we start to draw down later. Now, I don't know if this fits. That's obviously your expertise, but I just don't know if it's something where we can find a compromise.
All the reservoirs are, with the exception of Six Lake and Old Forge, in that they have, because they have such a small amount of storage capacity, they really don't have an appreciable, relative to Stillwater on the Black River, effect on the regulation of the Black River. Certainly not as compared to Stillwater. Stillwater's drawdown starts the beginning of June. As soon as we refill, we're in a drawdown mode. So sometime at the end of May, beginning of June. It's not like Old Forge or Six Lake where we hold the elevation steady throughout the entire summer and then begin a drawdown. So the drawdown of Stillwater, the position each day from about June 1st on, straight through to the following March 15th, we're every day in the process of preparing the reservoir for the next refilling. So it's not a case that I would just hold an elevation, wait until the end of September, and then begin the drawdown. And that, if we were to attempt to do something like that at the normal elevation, it would probably be physically impossible to release enough water in time to prepare the reservoir for spring runoff.
I also assume that that direction would pose a risk that the reservoir gets overfilled.
Certainly. I mean, that's the reason for the drawdown throughout the whole summer, into the fall, and through the winter, for that inflow.
If I could interject, like I said, over here, I've been up in that area forever. I feel like I'm older than dirt. I remember when Ernie Thompson used to regulate the dam in Stillwater. And I remember when Lee Crossman used to regulate the dam in Stillwater. And, you know, I've been there a long time. And I'm not even remotely suggesting that you don't start drawing down the 1st of June, because obviously that's what you need to do. You have a big space there, you accumulate, you know, and you've got the rainfall. You understand that part? All I'm asking for is 3 weeks. Now, if anybody were to be there physically and you see this drawdown, 3 weeks isn't really that maybe as significant in your numbers and for you to recover. You know, I can't recall, I think it was August, is it 6th or 8th or 10th or something like that, when it really started to drop. If you folks could consider pushing that off 3 weeks, you know, it's really a big deal. When you're in that area, it just has such an impact on that whole area up there, and the safety and the access, and it's very complex. We are unlike any other community that you have that has an effect with the level of the reservoir.
So really, I think what you're saying is that when the reservoir comes down to, based on the date you're referring to, around 71 to 73 is a point at which it becomes difficult to...
Yeah, because the water is so low that the docks are inaccessible. You have to go out on state land to access your boats. And you're on sand. You're basically docking your boat on shore. We do that in fall. You know, that's normal. Sometimes, like Robert said, sometimes the water does come back up and we're back at the docks in the fall. But that's an unusual occurrence.
Right.
But we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. This is a community, we've had a lot of legal attention brought to our community in these last recent years. And right now, you know, I remember when at Grassy Point, there was a log, big old white pine. You had a boat, you tied up to the log, you know, if there wasn't space, you beached it. It was okay then. You can't do that anymore. DEC, you can't leave a boat on the beach for more than 24 hours. So that's why we did the dock thing. Now we're losing our dock, and if you consider the black fly season, you know, and when kids get out of school and so forth, you're really looking at July and August. We don't have August anymore. But when we have to go out to what we refer to as the island, okay, we can no longer go into that little harbor there where the dock is. We go out on that island, the DEC right now, I can tell you, and I'd be happy to provide the board with the violations that were issued. This past year, they're disputing whether the road goes to the island. Right now, we used to use old, what I call block cars, you know, old junk trucks to get around. Can't do that anymore. You get a ticket. You have to have a registered vehicle, which forces you to use the barge, which forces you to spend $40 to go 1.25 miles in and $40 1.25 miles out every weekend to have a licensed vehicle. So people were using ATVs because they run, they're safe, they have brakes better than the old junk cars. Town of Webb doesn't allow ATVs. See, but we're not connected. Now, before we had the barge, what's that song the kids have? You got to keep them separated. Before we had the barge, Town of Webb kind of turned a blind eye to us and said, look, you guys up there in Beaver River, your roads don't meet our roads. It doesn't involve new things, so what? Do what you got to do. Okay, now we have the barge. That's a good thing, but it's a bad thing because now you have new vehicles. And I mean, this is so complicated, and it's not your issue, but right now in our community, you know, you've got half the population with the old mentality of let's giddy up, go, whatever. You have another new part of the population that are coming in in vehicles that are 3 months old, and they're letting their 14-year-old kid drive them because there's no law enforcement, they're having accidents. We don't have a lot of medical egress. I did set up something with the New York State DOT for on the railroad. It's just very complicated. So if we had a way where we could safely come in and out with our boats, people cannot, and here's another part of it, when the water gets this low, if you have a vehicle and you can get out to the island when the rangers aren't around, and you can pull your boat out in the fall, you better have four-wheel drive. Because if you don't have four-wheel drive, it's not coming out. And so this is all, I'm just giving you a briefing, but it's many layers of complication. It's not just somebody says they want to sit on their front porch and look at water for a couple extra weeks. There's an awful lot to this, and I think in the past, maybe it didn't seem to be as bad as it is now. Now, maybe that's just my own interpretation. But I have a question. That what do you call it, historical average? When is that started, when reservoirs started? Or when did they start measuring it?
The exact date I don't know, but this could be the entire based on the entire history of the reservoir. Long-term average.
So you're talking like in the 20s?
Yes. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of summarize what I think really is being what I think really is being said here, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it sounds to me like what you're saying and what you're asking chief engineer and the board to consider is when the reservoir elevation gets to a certain elevation, whatever that may be, to modify what we would use. What we would use as a target.
There you go. That's exactly what I wanted to do.
And flatten it out and hold it at an elevation for a period of time and then drop it.
Is that
I
possible?
sketched in on a small version.
Is that possible? Let me ask that. Is it possible?
In theory, yes. And okay. I mean, just at first glance, I think I sketched in, holding it at 1672 for 3 weeks from the middle of August, say, to the middle of September. That would still be a few weeks before the fall rains historically come in and affect the reservoir inflow and affect the reservoir elevation. So it becomes just a matter of whether or not the Black River can handle and the Beaver River can handle at the end of September what will be a regular, steady, sizable release, which usually is not always the case. We might just be making even minimum releases to maintain the elevation. But with a heavier release from the end of September to the end of October, you should be able to get back down to our former target elevation or intersect the previous curve with this new
Is it something
approach.
that the board can consider that retains the risk and the safety concerns that we would have as a regulating district? That for me would be the fundamental.
Well, I think it's something
Consideration.
Not to put yourself in a risk.
Is the initial drawdown, when we start drawing it down, is it for the confluence to keep the water moving, or is it just in preparation?
It's to prepare the Stillwater Reservoir. Depends on how much flows in the Beaver and the Black, but it's also to maintain flow.
We've got to keep the water
Certainly,
moving in the river.
in August or the end of July, the flow here in Watertown can be as low as 1,000, 1,200 CFS, and Stillwater would represent anywhere from 30 to 60% of the flow.
Okay.
So it's fairly significant, and that's why we make that drawdown, not only to prepare it, but to provide that water down here in Watertown. This is certainly something I think we can try. We could, it's just a matter
We
of.
could always go back to this, but.
Well, I think what you're hearing here, Carol, is that we're willing to really study this, and not give you, we're willing to study this and see if we can accommodate. And some of the people on this board have houses on the Sacandaga Reservoir, and it has the same issue.
Yeah, we're subject to the same concern.
We don't quite have the isolation, that you're talking about, but
Well, yeah, we
it
have
drops pretty
need,
significantly.
and then
Yeah.
we have all these other things, and let's face it, I'm sure if you have waterfront property on another reservoir, those people are paying a lot of money, and often, you know, the dogs and all that other stuff becomes a problem. So, but if
Everything's
some-
on wheels.
If somebody
Or
owns on
flotation.
a reservoir, if you own on a reservoir and you bought it that way, it's kind of like building next to the airport. You know, you have to understand that. But all I'm asking is if you could just give consideration and just push it through till like Labor Day, because once Labor Day, a lot of the people, I don't keep their boats in. But if it starts to dwindle, then the majority of the people, I mean, our population is probably half in usage after Labor Day, and it would be much safer, much safer.
Well, I promise you we'll study this with our
I was
professionals
just
here.
back in your area recently, so.
Are you? You got out?
I was back for the airplane crash.
Oh, yeah, that brewer, yeah.
Any questions, Carol?
No, I think I've got a good idea.
Thank you.
Listening, and
No problem.
when I said to my husband, I think it's important that I didn't come with 400 signatures, I thought, let's just drive this thing out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I know you came in late. Did you want to speak? Are you not on the?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No, really, I just really wanted to, once again, sit here to affirm our concern about the matter that you've already talked about. There's no point in going through it again.
Okay. All right.
Your reasonable folks have heard it already.
Okay, we move on to number 6, our capital projects for bonding and the seeker status. Excuse me, just one second. You know, you're welcome to stay for the whole meeting. Don't feel you're being rude if you walk out. Just so
Oh, I
you know.
thought the requirement was if you're going to be at the public comment, you got to listen to the rest of this.
You are welcome to stay. You're welcome to stay. Let me be clear.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you talked about discussion of the seeker for the capital project. That's where we are on the agenda. Mr. Ferrara has reminded me that the board's finance committee has considered the resolutions authorizing the board to finance 3 projects. Hawkinsville reconstruction, the ice sluice / spillway concrete repair at Conklinville, and warning sirens. With regard to the first of those projects, the Hawkinsville Dam reconstruction project, the board had previously talked about treating that project as an unlisted matter under secret. They sent we sent on their behalf a lead agency coordination letter to the DEC, the Army Corps, and the town. None of those, after the expiration of the 30 days that we gave them to respond, have responded saying that they would like to be the lead agency. Therefore, we prepared a resolution for your consideration, which we passed out today. It's a resolution of intent for the regulating district to serve as the lead agency for the Hawkinsville Dam reconstruction, seeking compliance, and to issue a notice of termination of non-significant, basically neg-definite project, for the reasons outlined in that resolution.
You're asking for a motion on the resolution?
I think the chairman's asking for a motion.
I am, yes. I'm just looking at it, that's all.
I'll move.
Second?
I can second.
Any further discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nope.
So moved.
We're also in the position to dispose with the State Environmental Quality Review Act review concerning the second project, the ice sluice / concrete reconstruction of Conklinville. That, I think staff all agrees, can easily be considered a type 2 action under secret regulations. Were the board to so designate that project a type 2, that concludes seeker with regard to that project. And we do that today to move that on.
And then type 2 is just
Negative impact.
maintenance, repair type project.
Okay.
Not a real change in.
Yeah, we talked about that before. Any motion?
I'll move on that.
Second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that's, we have to take action on, okay. I need approval of the November 5th board meeting minutes, which we all had. Motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Report of the executive director.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My report. Signing my report.
Yeah, I read it earlier.
Page 13, you'll find my report. I want to note that staff has completed internal reviews of emergency action plans for Indian Lake, Great Sacandaga Lake, Old Forge, and Sixth Lake, as well as Stillwater Reservoir. These emergency action plans are an important component of what we do in our effort to maintain dam safety. And it involves a significant amount of staff time just to keep those plans current and keep everybody practiced on what they actually are intended to do. So it's necessary work. I would also like to mention that we have continued discussions with CSEA representatives regarding negotiating for a current contract that's outstanding. Also, and I believe our general counsel can certainly give a lot better detail than I will, that just before Thanksgiving we received very good news from the Appellate Division, 3rd Department, decisions in 2 cases, New York State Electric and Gas and Northern Electric, South Glens Falls. Those are 2 projects commonly known together as Boralex. We received very good news. Essentially, it was a ruling massively in our favor, in my opinion, in terms of they're seeking refunds from the period of 2002 to 2008. Again, we will provide more detail shortly. And also, I just wanted to mention, as a follow-on to that, I have been contacted and have set a meeting to meet with Erie Boulevard to discuss the reservoir operating agreement and discuss it further. As you recall, we have spoken and met with their management repeatedly on that topic and others. I would expect that we're going to pick up where we left off. I am happy to take any additional questions that the board may have.
Any questions?
No,
With the executive director? No. We have no contracts to discuss, so we move right to committee reports. General Counsel, Mr. West.
I'd note that I've reached out to representatives from NYSEG and Boralex to address the Appellate Division decisions eliminating those companies' claims for refunds of state law-based assessments, and to address the arguments which must be advanced to FERC as part of FERC's expected order directing the commencement of headwater benefit assessment payments. Haven't heard back from either one, really. There's a proposal from Stillwater Associates to offset for the next 71 years their headwater benefit assessments against state law-based assessments. I think based on the NICEAG and Borlex decisions, we can discuss, I suppose, in executive session, but basically my recommendation is going to be that we reject that proposal. They didn't sue us. They're beyond the statute of limitations, and we believe FERC should take into account those decisions. We remain at impasse with the CSEA local regarding the 2012-15 employment contract. The fact finder appointed by PERB issued a report, and the executive director at the November meeting rejected the conclusions outlined in the fact finder's report. Pursuant to the Civil Service Law, Section 209(3)(e), the board is to conduct a public hearing at which the parties shall be required to explain their positions with respect to the fact-finding report, and thereafter the board shall take such action as it deems to be in the public interest, including the interest of the public employees involved. I would encourage you to hold that public meeting at an upcoming board meeting. January kind of reaches out and tries to grab me, where we will try and present our position, and we'll invite the union to present their position, at which point the board can make their decision and put this to bed. This
Sounds
has
good.
been
Sounds good.
lagging on forever.
Yep, too long.
So I guess you probably want to call for a motion to set that hearing date.
Okay. I'd like a motion that we set the hearing date for our January meeting with CSEA and the board.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we will add that to our January agenda.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes my report. And I'm obviously available to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Lester? Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Farrar.
Mr. Chairman, my report can be found on pages 16 to 67. I have several items of interest I'll quickly go through. On pages 51 and 52 are the contracts for legal and non-legal activities currently at the district, and I urge the board to look at those contracts each month, and that will take care of the public authority requirements to do so on an annual basis. On page 50 is the current cash flow forecast. I urge the board to look at that. Material disbursements for the period. This was the month where we paid our school taxes. And several...
And how much was that?
Oh, God.
$244,785.70 for Broad Alban, $388,342.20 for Mayfield, and $394,696.30 for Northfield.
Thank you. Covers that.
You may lose your job.
Couple more items. Network activity. On page 17 through 24, I provided the board with a quick spec on 2 proposed servers that will replace the 2 servers, one in Mayfield, one in Watertown. Those servers are at the end of their useful life. And again, this is in an ongoing effort to upgrade the district's IT infrastructure. The hardware on those machines is basically not good at this point, and the software certainly needs to be upgraded.
That's 1404.
Yes, these are not full server, these are small, these are glorified desktops.
Okay, that's
And
right.
for 1,400 change approximately,
So is
that's
that,
pretty cheap.
Yeah, very cheap.
So they will run the updated small business server, and we will have a much more consistent connectivity environment with the main server and all that. I propose, and on pages 19 to 24, that's the proposed job to move. Basically, it's migrating the data from the old server to the new server. It's not rocket science, and it'll be done fairly quickly. There'll be travel involved to come up here in Watertown, but these are budgeted items, and right now it looks like the migration could cost up to around $3,000 per machine. So that's really where the money is. And in Watertown, they need access to the accounting system and all this, so there's some fairly technical things that have to be done correctly in this effort. So my idea would be to have this, it's in the budget, so I'm not asking for the, and the board doesn't need to take any action. And I would hope that January, February, we have a pretty good idea when we'll take care of this, but I gotta meet with them and go over the particulars. And unless the board has any questions, I think that's really all I have.
I suppose if I don't have one question, how do we get to Tag Solutions? How do we make that choice? How did
How
that?
do we, because they have, Tech Solutions is the third in a number of companies that, first of all, they're on state contract.
Okay.
Formerly, they were a different company that we had engaged to do our original network.
So there's familiarity.
Absolutely. To go with any new company, you're now asking them to now go through your entire network.
I understand.
So you're spending hours upon hours of fairly significant per hour fees for them, someone to come through and do something that we already have someone on state contract. They're also very good at what they do. And the reason why they're not purchasing the service is because we can get them on state contract. State contract, even though they are on state contract, they're on there for basically their technical expertise, not as a reseller of equipment, so. Anything else?
I love the way you classify legal and non-legal. I love that phrase. Yeah, here's our non-legal services, great.
Please look at those guys.
Any other questions?
Nope, not fine.
Thank you very much. Chief Engineer,
Thank you, Mr. Finkel. My report begins on page 68 of the board package. It reflects November precipitation and inflows through November 20th when the report was written. Hudson River area, again, precip as it was in the previous months, fairly low, 30 to 38% of historic average. In the Black River area, precipitation was 30 to 50% of historic average at our reservoirs. And inflow at Great Sacandaga Lake and Indian Lake was fairly low, 33 and 23 respectively, and 65% of historic average at Stillwater Reservoir, again through November 20th for the month of November. And we've been over Stillwater's operation already. We did receive some some fall rains, and have started to track back closer to our target elevation in preparation for winter drawdown. Six Lake and Old Forge, fairly well positioned, fairly close, within a foot or so at Six Lake and right on our target elevation at Old Forge, and then back in the Hudson River area, Sacandaga, as it has since the middle of June, tracked almost spot on our target elevation, continues that way. And we recovered a little bit at Indian Lake from the fairly dry weather that we had in August and September. And as you can see, as represented by the historic average, we usually get those rains. Well, the rains helped us out. And in October, allowed that reservoir to come back up a little bit while we continued our releases so that we could track more closely to the target elevation. I think long-term, equal chance of precipitation being above or below historic average for the next month to 3 months. Temperatures are, according to the NOAA, expected to be above average for the next 3 months. So it'll be good that we are prepared with the reservoirs, because that would mean whatever precipitation we get might end up running off. So, who's music? Huh? And sorry about that. And I think that covers everything. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Close myself.
Any questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I was going to joke and say, what happened to the resolution we passed last meeting to completely drain the Stillwater Reservoir?
I do have one, I do have one other item that I didn't want to mention. Didn't really warrant a memorandum. You'll recall that the board requested we ask FERC to accept the board's decision not to follow with a maybe fourth visit
Arguably redundant.
to the stability analysis at Conklinville after it had been through a review of a review already.
And 20 years.
FERC had requested that it be sent back to the first independent consultant back, who was consultant some almost 8-9 years ago now. And they agreed to that with the caveat that we make sure that our current independent consultant review it as part of his effort under the third Part 12 safety inspection, which will be started next week. So that it simply becomes one of the documents that consultant now needs to review as part of his effort. So I don't see it shouldn't, and I would certainly take the position that our independent consultant shouldn't be looking for additional payment in order to review it, because it is part and parcel of all the documents he has to review as part of his effort.
So no additional expense?
I don't believe so at this time. No. And
Just for the
as I say,
record.
I wouldn't entertain a request from our current IC, even though he hasn't started the job, because this is no different than any other existing document in my mind. That's the way I will approach it with him, that it's an existing document. You review it and give it your blessing or concur or find fault with it, whatever, like any other document that exists that he has to review as part of his effort as independent consultant.
And therefore, the district has saved, if I recall, approximately $9,800 by a quadruple redundant review of something that started in excess of 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
Pardon me?
9,000.
I said 9,800, so.
Oh, no.
No, I said 9,800, so.
Yep.
Any other questions? The Hudson River Black River Administrator, Mr. Hodgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My report starts on page 98. The access permit renewals for the Great Sacandaga Lake were mailed out the first of this month, and they're starting to come back already. I'd like to give Sue Visco, our senior administrative assistant down there, handled the process of putting all these together in envelopes and mailing them out, 90% of them by herself. So she did a great job with that. And Cheryl, our senior administrative assistant from Albany that comes up and helps periodically, also helped her when she could with that. Let's see, state offices were closed for 3 days last month, a state of emergency in Jefferson County. So that's that same storm that hit Buffalo area. So we were, our senior administrative assistants were kind of at home, couldn't make it in because of the weather conditions. And let's see, last was, we did some riprap around the lake, Great Sacandaga Lake, 12 sites for a total of 322 feet, using 50 tons of stored, stockpiled stone and some existing stone. And that's all I have. I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody may have.
Any questions for John? Thank you. Any additional board member questions or comments?
I have none.
No.
Everybody's doing a good job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, I get, did we do the audit, the accounting firm gonna present the audit to us, or did we run through that already?
That was last month.
Okay, I thought so.
Yeah, they didn't show. Rick ended up doing the presentation.
Okay, that's why I missed it. Thank you. I knew there was something. Good job, Rick.
Finally, we need a resolution for the next board meeting, which I think is
Johnstown.
Johnstown.
Is that in Mayfield?
Johnstown or Mayfield?
You have Mayfield?
Mayfield, I'm sorry. Actually listed as Johnstown on there.
I'd ask, Mr. Chair, I'd ask that it be scheduled, if possible, prior to the 10th of January. I have a planned vacation leaving on the 10th of January, so
6th or 7th? That's a Tuesday or a Wednesday?
the 7th would be, I have a doctor's appointment on the 6th, so that I can go on the 10th.
Well, let's see what we can do.
7th would work better for me. Just so you and I start teaching Monday nights.
Yeah,
Makes it tough.
Rick brings up a good point. The bylaws might dictate when in just January that meeting has to be.
Because this is the reorganizational meeting, right?
Right.
Annual meeting.
Let me ask this, is there, and I'm not, I apologize, I'm not fully familiar with the bylaws. Mr. Counsel, is there a prohibition or a specific author, I suppose a prohibition against distant participation? I'd be happy to call in other words. I'll be on the road.
That is an excellent question. You are certainly encouraged to participate by phone if you want to. However, your participation by phone cannot provide a quorum, and you cannot vote.
And is that as the result of the bylaw, or?
Unless you have video capabilities and announce the second location where you are doing your video meeting from as a public meeting and invite the public to participate from that location.
Well, I'm driving to Florida, so I figure by then I'll be in South Carolina,
So the short
but I won't
answer-
have video.
The short answer is no. It's public office. Public
I'd be
office
more than
law.
willing to
Okay.
participate.
And
in
you said we may
location.
be, by statute, have to have it on the 10th?
I can't think exactly what the limitation
I-
is.
Well, we
Well,
still
I'd
have
like to-
time.
I'd
Why
like to have a
don't,
motion to have this on the 10th, pending, and we'll look at other dates.
Well, I don't know if it depends.
Not
So
the 10th.
whatever it is, when is it? It's
7th?
13th.
hold your phone on the 10th.
It's on the 13th.
13th.
The 10th.
And we do have it listed in,
Wait a minute.
for the meetings in Johnstown.
10th.
We have it listed on the motion.
10th is a Saturday. I don't know that anybody wants
That's
to
the
do
day it's
that.
leaving.
No,
But I didn't.
That's the date I'm leaving.
13th.
Somehow that-
13th.
13th.
The 13th in, did you say?
it says Mayfield here and Johnstown on the list of meeting dates, so,
You meet where you meet. Wherever you decide to meet is where we meet.
all right. A bar? I mean, I'm just telling you that we've listed 2 different locations.
So why don't, would you suggest Johnstown?
They're 8 miles apart, so more
Yeah.
or less.
Mayfield's fine.
Mayfield's good, because if you got another place.
Okay,
you got a
okay,
good
so,
Yeah.
you said the 13th?
13th.
So we need a motion to have our next meeting on the 13th in Mayfield, pending us looking at some other dates.
Right. So if we can get another date to accommodate Mr. Rosenthal, we'll do that
Yes,
as well.
we will do that.
Make that motion.
Second that motion.
And second.
Mr. Hayes.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Now, where we hold our meetings, is there any, I mean, could we switch the December meeting from Watertown?
Yes.
Please.
Okay. I think we will look at that next year.
Yeah, you'll have an opportunity at the January meeting to propose
Okay,
where you want to hold the meetings and where.
then we need a motion to adjourn? And we can go home into the snow? What? Oh, yes, yes, we're going into executive, so motion to go into executive session, and there will be no vote coming out of executive session.
And
More new business.
who made the motion?
I did.
Mr. Hayes.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are in executive session. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming. Happy holidays.